I retired and bought a log cabin where I could immerse myself in nature. No neighbors, no noise, no passers-by, only the wind moving through the trees and grass. Then my son-in-law called and said his parents would move in on Friday. If I didn't like it, I could go back to the city. I didn't say anything, but I left a surprise that would turn their lives upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. The ink on my closing packet had barely dried when Nora Griggs slid the envelope across her desk. Her office window looked out on a parking lot where March light turned dust into a slow river. The envelope held 2 keys on a brass ring and a copy of the cashier's check that had emptied more than half my savings that morning. 172,000. 41 years of estimating jobs and missed vacations and lunches packed in wax paper and a thermos lid used as a cup. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer. You did it. Nora smiled like she was handing me back my own breath. Thank you, I said, because my father raised me to say that when someone did their part. I took the keys and their weight surprised me. Not because metal weighs anything new, but because meaning adds mass where physics cannot. I put the envelope in my canvas bag with the closing packet, my driver's license photocopy, the hazard disclosure, the small folded list of utility numbers. Then I shook Nora's hand. Her palm was cool. Her nails were practical and unpainted, the way you hope a person's nails are when they shepherd you through paperwork that matters. Outside Missoula, air smelled like wet dirt and coffee. I stopped 2 blocks down at a diner that had a bell on the door and a waitress who called everyone Han without trying to impress anyone. The mug she set down in front of me had a chip on the rim. I turned it so the chip faced away and watched steam cut the air in a thin line. I did not drink it yet. I let the heat touch my face and planned the drive to Swan Valley. Highway numbers, distances, the spot where cell bars would drop to 1 and then 0. The phone vibrated against the table. Lila's name would have made my shoulders drop. It was Trent. I answered because I always answer. There are things a man can change and things he cannot. How he picks up the phone is a habit that tells on him. Evan. Good timing, Trent said. His voice had that office calm he had practiced in conference rooms. Listen, my parents are moving in with you on Friday. If you do not like it, you can go back to the condos. We will get you something closer to town. Family helps family. I watched a thin triangle of steam lift off the coffee and vanish. I put the mug down without ever tasting it. Trent families ask, I said. They do not order. That is exactly what I am doing, he said. Asking. But there is not really a choice. They lost their place. You have room. You are retired. You have time. They lost their place because of choices they made, I said. I bought a cabin that holds me a bed and 2 chairs. I bought it with money I earned. I am not looking for roommates. He laughed, which is what men do when they want the room to think they are not angry. It is decided. They will be there by late afternoon. Denise needs the larger bedroom for her back. We will pick up a second set of keys from you when we arrive. The waitress paused with a coffee pot and then read whatever was on my face and moved on. I looked at the brass ring on the table, 2 keys, the front door and the padlock for the shed. I could hear wind in pines, though there were no pines on this street in Missoula, just a planted maple with a trunk guard and a cigarette butt wedged near the grate. We are done with this call, I said and hung up. The phone screen went black on the reflection of a man who could pass for any retired estimator you have ever stood behind in a hardware aisle comparing drill bits by weight and not by package design. I did not finish the coffee. I left $10 folded under the salt shaker and walked to the truck. The closing packet slid on the passenger seat. The keys went in the tray between the cup holders with a sound that felt final. I started the engine, and the radio came alive with static and then a weather update. I turned it off. I wanted the sound of tires and air alone. Highway 83 takes you past water that holds sky like a mirror that refuses to break. The farther north I drove, the smaller the houses became until they were not houses but sheds with smoke curling up in thin threads. My bars dropped to 1 and then none. It was a relief, like taking off boots at the end of a long day. The cabin sat in a small clearing where the last owner had cut 2 pines and left the stumps flush with the ground. The roof was dark green metal that would sing in a hard rain. The porch boards had been sanded by someone who knew what grit to choose. I parked and did not get out right away. Elk prints scalloped the edge of the clearing where the ground turned soft. A raven called once from a snag. I stepped onto the porch and set my bag on the little table under the window. The key slid in, turned, and the door breathed open. It was my air now. Pine sap and old wood smoke and a faint trace of cleaner that someone honest had used last week after the seller moved out. I walked the perimeter like we did on job sites. Not because I did not trust, but because that is how you come to know what you own. Stove off. Breaker panel labeled. Fire extinguisher with a gauge needle in the green. Water heater intact. No drips in the trap under the sink. Window locks snug without slop. I put the closing packet on the kitchen counter and laid the copy of the cashier's check on top of it. The numbers meant nothing to the cabin and everything to me. I set the brass ring down beside the paper and watched how the late sun touched the metal. The chair I had bought at the consignment store in town creaked when I sat in it. I had bought it because it creaked. Some furniture should tell you when you are sitting in it. That way you cannot lie to yourself about how much time you spend resting. The phone buzzed again on the table. A new voicemail from Trent. Then another. He was building a stack of messages that would later serve as his record of being the reasonable one. My thumb hovered and then moved to airplane mode. I drew a square on the condensation ring the mug had left and wiped it away. I opened the drawer by the sink and took out the small green grid notepad that had lived in my pockets for 40 years. It was a new pad. The first page deserved a clean hand. Date, time, names. I wrote the exact phrasing of the call. I wrote the word ultimatum because that is what it was. I wrote the word response and left a space after it. A blank space is a plan if you respect it enough. I put a kettle on and waited. When it sang, I poured hot water over grounds. I ground myself and watched the bloom rise. Steam lifted. Wind moved in the pines behind the cabin and pushed a shadow across the floor from left to right. I carried the mug to the porch and watched that shadow finish its travel. The ring of keys sat on the little table and caught the last light. When it was gone, I stood, put the keys in my palm, felt their temperature, and set one of them down again on the wood. It tapped once, not loud, just enough to mark the line between what Trent had decided and what I would allow. 41 years of packed lunches bought 800 square feet of timber and air. That was the math I could feel in my hands as I unlocked the door again, this time not to inspect but to move in. The cabin received me without ceremony. Pine sap and old smoke waited. The floor grain lifted slightly near the threshold where boots had learned to pause. I set my canvas bag on the counter, opened the ledger envelope from the closing packet, and slid out the copy of the cashier's check. The paper had more weight than paper. I put it back and closed the flap with my thumb, the way you close a conversation you mean to remember. I unloaded slowly. Not because I am slow, but because some things deserve to arrive. Tools came first. I carried the wooden crate to the small room that had ideas about being a workshop and found the pegboard the last owner had left. Sheets of brown with a grid of holes that promise order if you have the patience. I laid the tools on the bench and stood there a moment, not touching them, deciding the map in my head. The hammer wanted the right side near shoulder height. Wrenches by size mouths closed like fish. The handsaw, a little lower teeth turned toward the wall. Yellow tape measure where my hand would find it without looking. Each piece lifted and hung with a pause. Not a ritual, simply the right way to meet a new room. Kitchen next. The coffee maker went exactly where the morning light would find it. I tested the sun through the window and moved the machine half a hand to the left, so the first beam would warm the carafe. I washed the mug I had brought from my old place, a simple thing with a chip I had already memorized. I turned the mug so the chip faced away. A man should not drink from his own mistake if he can avoid it. Books came out last, not many. A firefighter calendar I never wrote in. A field guide to birds that I had bought years ago and never opened. 3 novels old enough to smell like attic air. I stacked them by subject because that is how my mind files thoughts. History beside manuals. Manuals beside fiction. Fiction where I could reach it at night when the wood stove had gone quiet and the room needed company. Outside, the wind in the pines drew long lines across the clearing. A raven called once from the snag by the stump line. It is a sound that has no word inside it, only distance. I followed the sound to the porch and stood with my hands on the rail. On the far edge of the grass, the soil turned dark where water held on. Elk tracks printed the edge like careful signatures. Somewhere beyond the tree line, something larger moved and did not care that I knew it. Inside again, I found the drawer by the sink and placed the green grid notepad in front like a small roof over the day. I wrote down the time I arrived and the things I had put where they belonged. If you write down what you do, lies have less room to grow later. I added a line for the phone call at the diner and left a space for what would come next. The phone sat beside the pad face down. I tapped it once and the screen woke to a single bar of service that winked to none. Good. Privacy has a sound. It is the quiet that happens after a screen dies. I made coffee and did nothing while it brewed. When the drip ended, I poured and let steam touch my face before I drank. The taste was familiar and new at the same time. Same beans, different water, cleaner air. I sat in the chair I had placed under the window. It creaked once with a sound that said, "You are here," and then it settled into silence. I looked at the keys on the table. The brass ring held two shapes that used to belong to a stranger. Now they pretended to know me. The sun slipped, the light moved off the coffee maker, and I noted that I had placed it right. Tomorrow the first heat would land on glass and glow, and I would feel even for a second that 20 minutes of attention had made a life softer. I did not turn on music. The cabin did not need it. A far truck groaned somewhere down on the road, and then the sound passed and the world closed around my little piece the way water closes around a hand when it moves through a lake. Near dusk, I stepped out with a folded lawn chair to try the porch as it would be at night. The wood remembered my weight from earlier and gave a small complaint as if to say, "Do not forget me when the mornings are easy and the evenings are gentle." I set the chair so my back had the wall and my eyes held the tree line. A white thread of cloud worked its way east. The air thinned to the kind of cool that makes you feel your lungs fill all the way. The raven called again and answered itself from farther off. I felt the old habit of counting. 2 calls. Pause. 1 more. The phone vibrated. A bar had returned long enough to deliver something. Lila. I answered and heard the city around her traffic sneaking through seams in her window. "Dad, are you there? Did you make it up today?" "I did," I said. "I am in the chair, and I am pretending I have always been in it." She laughed softly. I could hear worry in the laugh. I pictured her standing in the kitchen thumbnail worrying the edge of a magnet on the fridge. "Did Nora treat you right?" "Paper's all good." "Nora was solid," I said. "The envelope is here. The check copy is here. I put the coffee maker where the light lands. The tools are up by size. It feels like a place that meant to meet me." "I am happy for you," she said. Then a small pause. "Trent has been very on edge. Work is rough. He has been short with everyone. Work has always been rough in his telling," I said. "I know." Another pause. There was a... She stopped and then tried again. "There was a bad streak for Harold last year. Online. Cards or something. It was stupid. They have been trying to recover. I should not have said that. Forget I said that." I let the words sit. Bad streak. Online. The words built a small bridge to the way Trent had spoken at the diner. I did not walk all the way across the bridge. I just set a foot on it and felt the weight. "I will not repeat what you told me," I said. "Are you safe? Are you and your mother-in-law safe?" "We are fine." She rushed the words a bit. I could hear her try to smooth the air. "Trent just wants to help them. He wants everyone to be okay. He thinks you having space means you can help. Space is not the same as permission," I said. "Family is not a bank and it is not a hotel. It is a table. People who sit there ask if a chair is free before they pull it out." She was quiet a moment. "I know you. You are calm, but it means you are building something." I laughed without sound. "I have a notepad open," I said. "Of course you do," she said. Then her voice softened. "Dad, I am sorry for the pressure. I am not asking you to change your mind. I am asking you to be careful. There is a lot of pride wrapped around this." "Pride is loud," I said. "Truth does not need to raise its voice." We said goodnight. When the line closed, the porch felt larger. The raven had gone. The dark took the clearing into itself the way old photographs take light and keep it. I stayed until the air moved from cool to cold, and then I went inside. I wrote down the call with Lila in the green grid. I wrote the words "bad streak" and circled them once. I did not make a line to anything. I let the circle sit. I washed the mug and set it upside down on a towel. I ran a finger along the chip and made a note to sand it smooth with fine paper. The world is full of small problems that you can fix with your hands if you choose to look at them closely enough. The bed took my back like it had been waiting all day to learn my shape. The wood stove clicked as it cooled. Somewhere above the roof, something stepped along the ridge and then stepped off. The chair by the window let out one last soft sound as if it were settling itself for the night. The cabin did not promise to protect me. It promised to tell the truth about whether I belonged in it. I fell asleep before the promise was finished. Morning would bring the first light on glass and the first coffee poured in a new room. It would bring the quiet I had purchased with years and paper and choices. It would also bring the memory of a voice that told me what would happen on Friday, as if I were a tenant in my own life. I turned on my side and let that voice move away like a truck on the road that only exists if you open the door to hear it. A small wind found the pines and combed them once. Then the night held. I asked the ranger about bear habits like a nervous newcomer. I took notes like an engineer. The visitor center sat low against the pines so the roofline looked like it had grown there. Displays inside showed maps with colored pins and photos of scat that someone had labeled with neat block letters. A bell rang softly when the door closed behind me. The air had the clean of floor wax and wet wool. A man in a green shirt with Whitaker on the tag looked up from a binder and marked his place with a yellow pencil. "Help you with something." His voice had time in it. I set my small green grid pad on the counter and told him the truth. I am new to this stretch. Swan Valley side. Cabin off a small spur near the river bend. I do not want to be stupid. I want to be prepared. Prepared beats lucky, he said. He unfolded a laminated map and laid it under his hands. This is last season's corridor data. He tapped with the eraser and walked me along invisible roads the animals know better than we do. Black bears tend to follow drainages in spring. They nose into lower edges of snowline for emerging greens. In fall, they work edges for fruit. Grizzlies are around, but farther east this year. You have elk that run your clearing, which you already know by the edges of their prints. You will see coyotes. If you keep your place clean and your garbage in a proper container, everyone minds their own business. The problem comes when people forget the rules. He slid a pamphlet across. Attractants. Food storage, pet food, bird feeders, grease traps, toothpaste in trucks. The list felt longer than a grocery run. He added a card with the number for reporting problems that are not emergencies, but should not be ignored. I wrote as he talked. Corridors, edges, spring greens, fruit, scent cones. I asked about wind. He smiled. It matters, he said. Every nose out here reads wind like a newspaper. If your place smells like a free lunch, you will get readers. He lifted a finger and then licked it and held it up, half joking and half not. I did the same and felt a thin cool on one side. West to east right now. That will change by afternoon. He pointed to a small diagram pinned near the counter. Typical draft patterns on warm days. The land breathes. Pay attention to that and you will avoid most trouble. He asked where I was from, and I told him Missoula. He studied my face like he was pinning it to memory and then leaned on his elbows. One more thing, he said. If anyone tells you to throw scraps near your porch to keep animals away, that person should not be invited back. Anything with a nose will come if it thinks you have gifts. You are doing this the right way by asking about prevention. Do not teach wildlife that porches feed them. Teach them that porches are boring. Boring sounded like the exact life I wanted. I put the pamphlet in my pocket with a care it did not require but maybe deserved. He drew a small bear paw on my notepad where the river bend met the timberline and wrote, "Ease up your speed here. They move low this month." I thanked him the way men who old enough to have learned manners thank other men who keep maps for a living. Outside, the light had thinned to a flat overcast. I walked 2 blocks to an outdoor store with a carved trout over the door and a cowbell that clapped once when I stepped inside. The wall held trail cameras in boxes that looked like lunch pails for soldiers. A woman with a scar under one eye and braid rope long asked what I wanted to watch. I told her bears, coyotes, people. Mostly people. She nodded like everyone says that at some point. You want motion sensor with night eyes, she said. Cellular if you have even 1 bar up there. Set to send a still-on trigger and a clip if you need it. Avoid the ones that promise magic. You want mundane, that works. She walked me through 2 models with patient hands. This one wakes fast. This one has better battery life. She opened boxes and let me feel weight. We talked about mounting height and angles and how to mask scent with clean gloves out of the package. She slid a pack of straps across and a pair of nitrile gloves and a spray bottle that claimed to make nothing smell like anything. I bought both cameras and the straps and the gloves and a small solar panel for each camera that did not look like it would shout with reflection. "How is spring for wildlife this year?" I asked as she rang me up. "Wet," she said without looking at the register. She snapped a rubber band around the receipt and set the bag on the counter. "Spring draws in everything with a nose." She raised an eyebrow like she had just told a joke I might get later. At the cabin, the sky had turned the color of a paper cup left in the rain. I set the new gear on the porch table and opened the cases with the quiet care of a man who values small things done right. The gloves pulled tight and smelled like a dentist office. I ran my finger along a strap's weave and decided on trees. One camera would take the approach where the driveway necks down. The other would read the front porch edge from a high point that kept wiring and screws out of casual reach. I lifted each unit to my face and checked lenses for smudges. I wiped with a cloth that came in the box and took a photo of the gear layout just to have my own baseline later. Before I stepped off the porch, I licked a finger and felt the air again. The cool pressed the inside of the finger this time, east to west. Clouds shifted, wind changed its mind with the day. I walked the driveway slowly and looked for places where tires had pressed a habit into dirt. A tamarack near the bend had good line of sight without being obvious. I strapped the mount and felt the strap bite into bark just enough. I stood back 10 paces and then 20. The angle took the width of the drive and the lower edge of the embankment where a man might try to step without wanting to trip. I took a signal test. One bar winked in and out. Enough. The camera told my phone its name and made a small acceptance tone. I took a screenshot of the signal icon and saved it with a name that would make sense when I looked tonight. At the porch, I chose the post that faced the steps but offset. I did not want a straight shot that a person could see and reach. I mounted a little higher than eyeline, but not so high the angle would cut off faces. The solar panel tucked under the eave out of heavy weather. I walked to the yard edge and looked back to read the sight line the way we look at construction from the sidewalk to see if the crown of a roofline hits where our eye expects it. The camera nestled in shadow. The lens had a clean view of the boards and the mat and the door and a slice of approach. I took another signal test and a screenshot of the speed that returned. Not fast, but not nothing. I wiped my hands and put the gloves in a small bag so the next time they would not smell like the inside of a pocket. I took the pamphlet from Whitaker and read it once more. Leave no bowls, secure grease, or double wrap trash and keep it away from the house. Never ever leave food on the porch if you like your porch. It felt like advice for more than animals. I set my phone on the porch table and opened the camera app that came with the units. A simple screen showed 2 gray tiles. A button labeled Test woke them one at a time. The first tile turned to a live view of the drive. A bird hopped into frame and then out. A second button sent a still to my inbox. I watched the little wheel spin and then stop. The photo arrived with a timestamp so exact it looked like a receipt for a moment that would never spend. The second tile went live on the porch and I saw my own chair and the ring of keys catching dull light. I tilted my head to see what the camera saw that I did not. It saw the edge of a shadow where someone could wait. I made a mental note to adjust the light by 1 small lamp for night so the sensor would not fire at moths and wind. I walked the perimeter once like we do with a new slab before the pour. The wind came soft and carried the smell of wet dirt and fir needles. My finger told me it had changed again. I liked knowing the cabin would warn me in the smallest ways if I paid attention. At the driveway, I stood still long enough to measure how sound carried when a truck turned from the road beyond the trees. It took 8 heartbeats from turn to view. Enough time to be ready. I went inside and wrote down what I had done. Camera 1 at the bend with a name I would not forget. Camera 2 at the porch post. Solar panels tucked. Signal tests taken. Screenshots saved. Pamphlet pinned by the door with a small nail so I would not pretend to have memorized it. I dialed Whitaker's non-emergency number and left a brief message that I had placed cameras for property monitoring and that all attractant protocols were in place. Courtesy, paper trail, habits that keep a man from having to raise his voice later. The light shifted toward evening, and the clearing took on that washed look where edges go gray before they go dark. I set the kettle and waited without checking my phone. From the porch, I could see one camera in the language of its small green light, and could not see the other at all, which meant I had done it right. In the distance, the river moved without sound I could hear. I brought the mug out and sat where the chair creaks once and then goes quiet because it recognizes you. The phone buzzed on the table. Not a call, a short chime that meant a test image had arrived and that my little watchmen were awake. I kept the cabin clean and the porch cleaner. Bears hate clean porches. The morning began with a bucket and a brush. I swept the boards until the last pine needle lifted and went over the rail. I scrubbed the rail where hands would naturally grip. I washed the mat and let it dry flat on the steps so there would be no smell of last week left in the weave. I wiped the door hardware with a vinegar cloth and then again with water so there was no sweet to it. The porch learned to be boring under my hands. Boring was the lesson. The trash routine took the rest of the hour. Every bag double and then triple. Food scraps sealed inside a smaller bag that went inside a second bag with a twist and a knot, and then into the bear box I had set at the far end of the drive. The bear box was dented steel with a latch that made a sound like work. I placed a fresh contractor bag inside as a liner and wiped the rim with a dry rag so there was nothing for a nose to celebrate. The lid shut with a steady weight. I stood and listened to the latch settle. It did not echo. Good. Inside, I checked what the pamphlet called attractants. No open wrappers, no bowls left to air, no grease left lazily on a pan. The stovetop clicked once as it cooled from the test boil I did to see if steam carried into the room. I wiped the counter in long lines and then ran a dry towel after to erase the smell of anything but wood and a little old smoke that had been here before me. On the driveway, I planted the small sign I had laminated the night before at the office store in town. Wildlife active area. Caution. I drove the stake with a dead blow mallet so the vibration would not ring through the ground. The plastic flashed once and then went dull when a cloud slid over the sun. I stepped back and read it like a stranger would read it. The message was plain. The valley belongs to more than people. I walked the cameras and checked sight lines. The drive unit would see the bend where dust plumes first showed and the small shoulder where a person might step to catch their breath. The porch unit held the line on the steps and the door. I angled each lens a hair to reduce glare and took test stills that chimed to my phone a few seconds later. The overlay printed the time in a clean font that looked like a cash register receipt. I saved each test shot in a folder I named by date and a word I would not forget. Bend. Steps. Wind moved from river toward ridge. I felt it on the back of my hand. I raised my finger like Whitaker had showed me and let the cool from one side find the skin. Then I set the kettle and waited. When it sang, I poured and let the first heat travel my face. I took the mug to the porch and set it where the light found the surface and made a little planet there. The chair creaked once and then was quiet. It was almost noon when the first camera woke my phone. A small buzz, a still of the bend, a dark sedan at the edge of frame. Dust lifted like a curtain opening. The second buzz came as the hood crossed into the full view. The sign stood in the right of the frame with its message plain. The overlay stamped the moment down to the minute. I did not need the numbers to know that the day had arrived. I could feel the old habit in my chest, the one that counts. 3 breaths before car doors, 2 before first words, 1 before the mistake people make when they step into a place they do not understand. The sedan stopped short of the porch steps. The microphone on the approach camera caught the first sentence through the open window. "Denise, this smells like sap and dirt." She said it with a little heave in the middle like her nose had never met trees in April. The passenger door opened. The driver door opened. Shoes hit gravel and made that dry crackle that tells you the ground has not seen rain in a few days. Harold walked around the hood and stood with his hands on his hips and looked at the sign and then passed it at the porch. Denise touched the corner of the sign with one finger as if it might be sticky. The porch camera sent a clip. I watched them watch my door as if it owed them something. I kept the cabin clean and the porch cleaner, and the woods decided to add a footnote. 2 black bears moved through the far line of trees the way slow ideas move through a room not in a hurry because they already belong there. They stayed at the edge where the grass darkened near the runoff. Their heads lifted once to read the air and then lowered to the ground again with no interest in the car or the people or the sign. "Spring carries every smell around it," Whitaker had said. The valley had its own errands today. The drive camera grabbed a still as the bears moved past the notch in the brush. The overlay made the moment official in a way wild animals do not care about. On the porch, my mug cooled and the steam thinned, and I heard nothing except the far river under the wind. In the frame, Denise froze with her mouth open, and Harold turned his head slow and then fast. He did the math of distance and speed and unknowns, and the sum on his face was not generous. "Harold, get in the car. Now." It came out low and flat, the way a man talks when the last of his certainty has already left the scene. They moved without grace. Denise stumbled on the small lip where gravel meets grass and did that little hop people do when they do not want to admit they almost fell. Harold's keys flashed once in sun and then vanished into the shadow of the sedan. The cameras saw everything with their quiet patience. The lens does not care what a person deserves. The lens cares what happened. Car doors slammed with the soft hollow that new cars have. The engine started higher than it needed to. Gravel sprayed and lifted in a rooster tail that caught my sign and dusted it until the letters looked like they had been here a year. The sedan reversed, then lurched forward and took the bend wide enough to clip a fern and make it bow, like a man who has not practiced apologies. I stood inside the doorway and watched the cleared space where the car had been returned to simple. The bears never looked up, ever. They finished whatever small interest the grass offered and went deeper into shade, as if they had merely turned a page. The world in the frame relaxed its shoulders. The sign settled back into itself. The porch boards held the memory of my old rag and the hot water and nothing more. Quiet returned with that click. I am starting to know the click that lives between a thing happening and a thing being over. I sat down and let the chair speak that one sound it knows how to make. I picked up the phone and scrolled the images. Drive approach with the hood at the bend. Wider framing with the sign legible. The two shapes beyond the trees, dark and sure. The still with Denise caught mid-sentence, her mouth shaped around the word dirt. The clip where Harold looked at distance and then chose the safer mathematics. I saved them to a folder with the date and a word I would not forget. Arrival. I did not send the images to anyone. Not yet. They were for the file. They were for the story later when someone in a clean shirt decided to tell a different version to people who were not here. Facts are less about argument than about furniture. You can sit in them. You can put your hand on the back of a chair and say, "This is where it goes," and someone else can try to move it, but the dent in the rug will still tell the truth. The kettle was still warm. I poured the last of it and put the cup to my mouth and tasted the thin bitter that coffee gets when it waits too long. I did not care. My hands were steady. The sign at the drive caught a new edge of light where the dust had settled and the letters shone a little because they had done their job. A car door sound lived in the air for a breath and then left. I wrote down the times in the green grid and the two sentences I had heard. "Denise, this smells like sap and dirt." "Harold, get in the car. Now." I added a small note that said "Bears present at tree line" and circled it once. The breeze tilted the pamphlet by the door. I pinned it flatter and smoothed the edge with my palm. The porch smelled like wood and a little sun. The chair under me told me, as it always does, that I belonged. The cameras went back to sleep. The path in front of the steps did not keep any footprint. The day resumed. That night my phone became everyone's concern. The first ring came while the kettle settled from a late boil. I let it go to voicemail and listened with the chair tilted back 2 inches. Cousin Linda. Her message started with "I heard," followed by the slow walk to a point that always ends with concern. She had talked to Trent. He was worried for me. He said I had cameras everywhere. He said I was unstable after the move. He said the wildlife up here was unsafe and that I did not understand what I had done to myself. I set the phone down and opened the green grid pad to a fresh page. Top line, call log. I wrote Linda, time mark. 3 points. Cameras everywhere. Unstable. Unsafe with wildlife. I underlined the third point once because it was the kind of charge that sounds like care when it is sabotage. The second call landed before I put the pen away. Marty from my old firm. We had stood shoulder to shoulder on a dozen job sites where wind made your eyes water and numbers kept roofs on. Marty cleared his throat twice, which he does when a person wants to be kind and still deliver what they came to deliver. He had heard from someone that I might be having a hard time adjusting and that I was recording everyone who came near me. He had heard there was an incident with animals on the property and that I had taken risks an older man should not take. I wrote Marty, time, 2 clears of the throat, origin vague, same 3 points. I added 1 word in the margin, Script. The third ring came from a local number I did not know but recognized in shape. The neighbor up the road with the mailbox that leans toward the ditch. Connie. She sounded like a person trying to be a good neighbor the way people try pie at church even if they are not hungry. She said Trent had reached out because he was worried about me living alone. She said if I needed anything, she and her husband had a generator and could run me down to town for groceries when the road iced. She added that she had heard I was setting up security like a compound and that made folks uneasy. I wrote Connie, wrote generator, wrote compound and drew a box around it. The word will be useful later when someone writes it in an email to a county office and I need to show its birth certificate. I pressed the phone to my ear again and called her back. Thank you for offering the generator, I said. If the road ices, I will bring pie to pay you back when the road melts. I have 2 cameras to see who is at my gate and my door. The porch is clean, the trash is sealed, the pamphlet about attractants is pinned by my door. I am not unstable. I am retired in a place that requires adult habits. Connie listened all the way through without jumping in. That is a skill. She said I sounded fine to her. She said she understood how whispers get loud out here. She said if anyone asked, she would say I had spoken clearly and that the valley smells like fur and not fear. We said good night, like people say it when they plan to keep being neighbors. The phone buzzed with a voicemail alert and then vibrated again. Lila. I answered and heard the city around her the way a seashell holds ocean echoes. She did not say hello. Dad, you moved up there so fast and started recording everything and it has everyone worried. That is not like you. Trent says the animals are coming too close and you do not know how to handle it. He says you are being paranoid. He says you are shutting everyone out and refusing help. The phrasing was clean and practiced, word for word. My hand went to the notepad without looking. I wrote Lila verbatim. I wrote word for word and drew a small square because a map with a square means something has been surveyed and measured and can be trusted until someone lies about the line. I am fine, I said. Trent is not. Say that out loud and see how it sits in your mouth. I have 2 cameras because men who live alone in woods need to know when a truck enters their drive. I have a clean porch. I have a pamphlet from the ranger about trash and soap and birdseed. I have a notepad with times and names. I have lungs that like cold. That is all. She was quiet for a long breath. I could hear her pull air that sounded like a sheet being lifted and then set down. He is trying to help his parents, she said. He believes you could make this easier. He believes a lot of things I said. Belief is free. Paper costs money. Paper wins in rooms with plaques on the wall. She told me good night and told me to sleep. The call ended with a small click and left the room feeling a degree colder. I looked at the grid pad, 4 lines, 4 sources, the same 3 assertions marching like a row of fence posts you notice only when a horse leans against them. The next hour was a montage of smaller noises. A text from a number I did not have anymore that used to belong to a subcontractor who liked to drink at lunch and apologize after. A message through a social account I never used from a man who once sold me a broken compressor and called it a deal. 2 missed calls from Trent in a row with no voicemails, which is the voicemail of a man who wants his ring to be angry for him. I worked the page. I wrote bullet points without the dots and left white space between each so later eyes would see pattern. Cameras everywhere. Translation. 2 cameras. Drive and porch. Unstable. Translation. Retired and organized. Unsafe with wildlife. Translation. Guide pamphlet pinned. Trash triple sealed. Bear box latched. Clean porch. Ranger brief recorded. I wrote a sentence in the bottom border in letters that filled the line. Say less. Show more. The kettle hissed and the stove clicked and the window moved a hair in its frame as the temperature outside dropped. I turned the page and started a section titled Evidence, even though I did not write the title as a title. Drive stills with time overlay. Porch clip. Wildlife at tree line. Sign planted. Arrival times noted. Sentences recorded. Car tag partial, dust direction and clip consistent with wind that hour. Each item got a small box to the left so that one day a different color pen could lay a check mark through it. I listed the names and numbers of the people who had called and the dates they had last spoken to me before today. It mattered to me that their sudden concern was new and not a continuation of actual care. At 10:30, the phone rang again, and I let it go. The voicemail came in almost immediately. Trent. He had chosen a tone that men use when they want to sound like the adult in the room. He said I was making the family nervous. He said my cameras were invasive and probably illegal in some way. He said the bear incident proved I was reckless. He said his parents would arrive Friday with or without my permission because my permission was not required for an act of mercy. I wrote with steady hand, "Mercy is not a forced entry." The phrase went into the margin, and under it I wrote a name, Carla Monroe. I did not know her yet in person, but I knew of her. A Missoula attorney with a reputation for building clean lines around messy situations and for liking clients who arrived with tidy binders. I did not close the notepad. I picked up the phone and opened email because a paper trail today is an umbrella tomorrow. Subject line: consultation request. I kept the body short and factual. My name, my age, property address, proof of purchase. Summary of events and the 3 talking points being distributed by my son-in-law. A note that there were 2 cameras on my property for security. A note about the ranger visit. A note about a clean porch and a bare box. I attached 4 stills with timestamps and a scan of the pamphlet page on attractants. I listed the names and numbers of the callers and the times the calls occurred. I asked for an appointment at her earliest opening and confirmed I would bring proof of identity and the closing packet. I read it twice to remove any heat that might feel good now and feel dumb in the morning. Then I hit send. The sound in the cabin changed for a second. Email whoosh. Subject line on my screen read, "Consultation request." The chair creaked once and then settled. The night reassembled itself around the click. Carla Monroe did not smile at my binder. She respected it. Her office looked out over Higgins' second-floor morning light squared on the rug. No leather drama, wood desk, 2 chairs that did not wobble, a framed degree from the University of Montana, and a photo of a trailhead that needed no caption. I set the binder down and opened it to the page I had marked with blue tape. Timeline first, names and dates, stills with time overlays, a printout of the Ranger pamphlet on attractants pinned with a paperclip. Carla read without performing attention. She asked 3 questions in 20 minutes, and each question made the pile of paper look like it knew why it existed. "You do not fight gossip," she said. "You outpaper it." I slid the closing packet forward with the cashier check copy and the assessor parcel number. She drew a clean sheet from a drawer and wrote while she spoke. "We are going to move the cabin into a revocable living trust with an independent trustee. That is me for now. It is your trust. You can revoke it at any time. While it exists, it is a wall around the property. No one can test your competence by rumor and walks in here with a key. We file a new deed that shows the trust owns the real estate. You still live there and manage it, but the title with your personal name disappears from the easy places." She looked up. "Can you live with that voice?" "I can live with walls that hold," I said. She nodded once like an engineer who has poured 1,000 slabs. Then beneficiary changes. Every account that can name a beneficiary we retitle or retarget, so the trust is the party that inherits from you and passes to your heirs the way you say, not the way a loud man demands. We will document your decision-making at each step. The file will state clearly that you are acting freely and with counsel. Her pen stopped. Next piece, medical baseline. Not because you need it, because a bad actor will try to say you do. She wrote Dr. Patel on the pad and slid over a card. Cognitive assessment. Standard testing. Letter on clinic letterhead. You bring that back to me and it goes in the binder in a tab named Health. If anyone files a concern with Adult Protective Services, we are ready before they knock. If they knock, you let them in and pour coffee and hand them the letter and your auto-pay receipts and you ask how their day is going. She held up a finger. That last bit helps. We moved to fees and filings. She printed trust drafts while I watched the laser warm. Printer hum. She walked through each section in plain language. Trustee powers. Revocation language. Schedule. A listing the cabin and the parcel number and a modest account I would use for taxes and repairs. We set distribution terms that named Lila as beneficiary if she was not married to Trent at the time of my death, or if he had signed a formal waiver of any claim or expectation. Carla held my eyes when we reached that clause. "There will be feelings about this," she said, "but feelings do not move recorded documents." She asked me if I wanted to keep the clause. I said yes. She nodded and placed a yellow flag where my signature would go. Her assistant brought in a notary seal and a pen that weighed just enough to make my hand want to be careful. We signed. The notary took her time and pressed the seal into paper with that heavy click a man remembers if he ever signed a mortgage. Stamp. Clack. Carla checked each page, flipped them back into order, and placed the drafts to one side and the signature originals on the other. "I want you to call your bank and request beneficiary change forms today," she said. "Retirement account. Any insurance. Anything with a payable on death or transfer on death box. Put the trust name there. Ask the service person to note in your file that you requested the change voluntarily with counsel present. It is an unusual note. It reads very well later." She looked up. "Do not argue about this on the phone. Read from a small card if you need to." I smiled. "I brought cards," I said. I slid a stack of index cards across. She read one and nodded. "Good, that habit will save you money." She slid a new folder toward me with tabs already labeled. Deed record, trust certificate, health, banking, calls, and notes. She placed my grid pad on top of the stack and patted it once. "Expect a competency challenge within 2 weeks," she said. "It is a common playbook. A flurry of calls about your safety. An anonymous welfare report. Someone will use the word erratic. We answer with letters and bills paid on time and the Ranger pamphlet and a house that smells like soap and not like last night. Let them come." I asked about cameras. "2 is standard," she said. "Porch and drive. No audio inside the home. Clear signage is nice to have. You have a wildlife caution sign already at the drive. That helps." We printed a small placard that read "Surveillance active for property security." She tucked it into a sleeve with pins. "Put this at the corner of the porch. Front right. Eye line but not loud." The invoice for today sat at the edge of the desk, total written in clean numerals. I placed my card on top and signed the slip. She slid receipts across, and I placed them in the binder under a new tab marked Fees. Receipts are proof that a man is hiring competence on purpose. It is hard to argue with a line item. I left with a list. County clerk for recording. Bank for beneficiary changes. Clinic for Dr. Patel. Library copy station to scan the signed trust certificate and email a copy to myself and to Carla. I put the folder on the passenger seat like a passenger who mattered and drove to the clerk first. The record office had tile that sounded like a school hallway. The clerk took the deed with both hands and stamped the upper right corner with a date and time. Stamp clack again. She slid a receipt under the glass and asked if I wanted a certified copy mailed to me. I said yes and wrote the address slowly so there was no room for a 7 to look like a 1. At the bank, a service representative asked me if I was sure I wanted to remove my daughter as direct beneficiary. I said I was not removing her. I was routing her inheritance through a trust to avoid third-party claims and unnecessary probate. The representative typed slowly and asked my permission to add a note that I made the change voluntarily and with counsel. I said I would be grateful for that note. We printed confirmation pages and I placed them under the banking tab. Printer hum. I signed and dated the index card in the pocket as a small audit of my own. At the clinic, a receptionist with gray hair pulled back into a smooth knot handed me a clipboard. Reason for visit. Baseline cognitive assessment. I wrote it plainly. Dr. Patel called me in on time. He introduced himself with a direct look and a calm that felt like competence. He explained the tests and why they matter and what they measure. He asked me to draw a clock. I drew a circle and placed the numbers in their positions and set the hands to a time he spoke. He asked me to remember 3 words and count backward by 7s. He asked me to follow a 3-step instruction that involved a paper and a turn and a touch. He asked me about the day of the week and where we were and who the president is. He did not rush the pauses. When we finished, he typed notes into a file that showed a header with the clinic name and a template with my name spelled correctly. He printed a letter on clinic letterhead that said I was mentally competent and physically able to manage my affairs and that there were no signs of cognitive decline. He signed it and the nurse stamped it with the clinic seal. The weight of that paper was lighter than a deed and heavier than a rumor. "How will you use this?" he asked. I said I will place it in a tab named Health, so when someone tries to decide my life by telephone, I can hand a person with a badge the paper they need. He nodded. "That is a good use of medicine," he said. Back at the cabin, I set the folder on the table and made a checklist with boxes drawn square and even. Trust recorded. Certificate scanned. Bank beneficiaries changed. Letter from Dr. Patel filed. Call to APS non-emergency left on voicemail as a courtesy that I am a new resident with cameras for property security and a clean attractant protocol. The message felt simple. I am here. I am orderly. If you come by, I will pour coffee and show you a kitchen that knows where things go. I placed the clinic letter in the health tab and wrote today's date on the tab edge with a fine pen so the ink would not bleed. I wrote a note to call Carla in the morning with the recording stamp time. I placed the small surveillance placard at the corner of the porch where she told me to. I looked at it from the drive and it spoke loud enough to matter and quiet enough to live there. The printer hummed as I ran one more copy of the trust certificate for the safe. The notary click from earlier still lived in my ear like a door that shut and stayed shut because the jamb was square and the screws were set into wood that does not strip. I sat the chair, gave its one sound, and the room settled around the file that would do my talking for me when the next ring began. Stamp clack. Printer hum. He came fast up my drive. I hit record before I stood. Gravel sprayed wide at the bend and rattled against the bear box like small hail. Trent left his door open as if the car might need to run inside after him. He climbed the steps 2 at a time and stopped when he saw the placard at eyeline. Surveillance active for property security. He smirked at the word security. He looked down at the camera on the post and then at my hand holding the phone steady at chest height. You are being unreasonable, he said. This ends now. You are on camera, I said. Your voice and your face are being recorded. Say what you came to say. He adjusted his jaw like a man about to argue with a manager who signs his checks. Then he said the word he had been rehearsing. Conservatorship. If you do not cooperate, we will have the court appoint oversight. You are not thinking clearly. You are isolating. You are a risk to yourself and to others. My parents will move in. The court will agree with me when they see the footage of wildlife. You put people in danger. You baited animals. You do not know what you are doing out here. I kept the phone steady. The porch smelled like wood and clean water. The bare box was latched. The pamphlet by the door hung straight. My chair behind me was quiet and ready. I said one thing. Step back from my door. He took one breath through his nose and did not step. He pointed down the drive as if pointing at a jury. Everyone knows you have cameras everywhere and that you are hiding in this cabin like a bunker. You are paranoid. You are recording us. You do not answer calls. You are not fit to make decisions about property that affects family. You are being recorded, I said again. Your statements are being saved. I will send this video to my attorney and to my daughter. Leave my property now. If you remain, I will call the sheriff for trespass. He leaned in a fraction. That little lean men use when they want to look bigger without earning it. He said I was cutting Lila out of her future with the trust. He said the clause about waivers was abusive and a court would see it for what it was. He said I had hired a predatory lawyer. He said adult protective services would arrive, and when they did, they would find a confused man with cameras and a mailbox full of warnings. I said I have a folder with dates and receipts and a letter from Dr. Patel stating my competence. I said I would gladly welcome anyone from Adult Protective Services into my kitchen, pour coffee and show them bills on autopay, and a house that follows the ranger's pamphlet on wildlife attractants. I said he had 15 seconds to get off my porch. He laughed not because anything was funny, but because he could hear the end of something and did not want to be the last to know. He backed away with that swing-armed walk men get when they are trying not to hurry. He turned at the top of the steps. This is not over, he said. It is not, I said. Then I stopped the recording and watched him drive out. The sedan took the bend too wide and spit a spray of stones across the ditch. The sound lifted and then went small. I tapped the screen. Upload. The clip climbed to the cloud on one bar. I watched the progress like a lifeline and breathed when the checkmark appeared. I sent the file to Carla with a subject line that told her exactly what the video showed. Porch encounter recorded. Threats of conservatorship. I attached a written incident report with time and weather and the words he used. I forwarded a copy to myself and saved it in a folder named by date and a word I would not forget. Porch. 2 days later, a state sedan eased into the drive and stopped in the place where respectful people stop. A woman stepped out carrying a tablet and a folder. She wore flats that told you she planned to stand all day. She looked at the placard and nodded once as if a question she had brought already knew its answer. She knocked and waited instead of shouting from the steps. "Mr. Mercer," she said when I opened the door. "I am Janice Rowe with Adult Protective Services. We received a complaint. If you have a minute, I would like to speak with you." I opened the door all the way. I did not leave the chain on because there is no chain, and because chains make a house sound like a story it does not need to tell. "Please come in," I said. "Would you like coffee?" She declined the coffee with a small smile and let her eyes travel the room without rudeness. The kitchen was clean. The trash can was empty and the lid closed. The counter held a drip coffee maker exactly where the light lands at 9. The bare pamphlet hung by the door. The bill file sat under a magnet with a list of auto-pays clipped on top. Electric, internet, water, property tax reserve. Each entry with the bank confirmation number and the date it drafts each month. I slid the list across. She looked at the page, then at me, then at the folder I had prepared. "You anticipated this," she said. "I have been an estimator all my life," I said. "I do not guess when I can measure." I handed her the letter from Dr. Patel on clinic letterhead. She read it fully and took a photo with her tablet. She asked to see the cameras and where they point. I showed her the porch post in the driveway bend and the placard with the word surveillance that had not spooked any deer. She asked if I had footage of any dangerous incidents. I showed her the stills with the 2 bears at treeline and the arrival of Harold and Denise saying sap and dirt and the quick decision to leave. I explained that I keep my porch clean and my trash sealed and that the ranger had advised exactly this. She wrote notes and did not rush. "Do you have firearms?" she asked. "No," I said. "I have a notepad and a phone that uploads to the cloud and a folder with tabs." She asked about food and daily tasks. I opened the refrigerator. Eggs and greens and a square of butter that knows its corner. She checked dates on milk and smiled when she saw a label written with a marker that matched the one in my pocket. She asked about medications. I set 2 bottles on the counter with correct labels from the clinic in town. She asked if I felt isolated. I said I chose quiet. She asked if I had family nearby. I said my daughter lived in Missoula and that we speak and that she is loved and that she is under pressure from a man who prefers shouting to spreadsheets. She asked if she could call anyone on my list of contacts. I handed her Connie's number up the road and Marty's from the firm and said they had spoken to me this week. She called Connie first on speaker. Connie said I sounded fine and that the valley smelled like fur and not fear. She called Marty next. He said he had cleared his throat twice and then delivered gossip he now regretted. He said I had built roofs over his head more than once with numbers that never failed. Janice thanked them both and ended each call with the courtesy of a person who spends her days in rooms like mine and knows how to leave with grace. She asked if I knew who filed the complaint. I said I did not and that I did not need to. She said she could not tell me anyway. She said the complaint alleged paranoia, unsafe behaviors with wildlife cameras aimed to intimidate refusal of medical care and financial confusion. She looked around again and then at the paper on the counter and then at me. "I will file my report today," she said. "From what I see, you are competent and safe and your home is in order. You have taken reasonable steps to secure your property. The cameras are within normal use. The wildlife concern is not supported. The medical letter is current. The bills are on time. Do you have any questions for me?" I asked if I should be doing anything differently. She said keep the porch boring and the trash sealed and the bills on autopay. She said I might consider a small card on the fridge with emergency contacts and my clinic letter date. She said if someone calls again, we will see that this is not about welfare. She closed her folder and stood. "Thank you for being thorough," I said. "It is my job," she said. "But you made it easy." She left with the same calm she arrived with. The door eased against the jamb and closed soft. The lock turned and clicked once like a small sentence at the end of a paragraph. 2 days after that, I received a letter on state letterhead. Case closed. Allegations unfounded. The last paragraph noted an observation that hung in the air longer than any stamp. Complaint appears to be motivated by a property dispute rather than genuine concern for welfare. I placed the letter under a tab with the word APS and slid a copy behind it. I printed the bank autopay proof and tucked it into the same sleeve. I opened the video clip one more time and watched the part where Trent said the word conservatorship like a lever he thought would move the world. Then I closed the folder and set it on the table. The chair made its one sound. The cabin held its air the way a good room does when it is ready to meet whatever comes through the door next. The door was quiet. The lock remembered the click. Lila called by accident with the truth. It was late afternoon and the light on the coffee maker had just slipped an inch when my phone lit up with her name. I answered and heard her speaking before she knew I was there, a half sentence meant for someone else. He handled that line of credit himself. I told him it was dishonest. Then she heard the click of connection and stopped. Lila, I said. Dad. Her breath caught. I tapped the screen wrong. I was trying to call the bank. I did not mean to drag you into this. You said line of credit, I said. Which line? She exhaled and the sound made paper shift somewhere near her. Harold had a bad streak online last year. Cards. Small wins and then bigger losses. Trent covered a piece of it by pulling a home equity line on our house. 32.5. He said it was temporary and that I did not need to worry. I did not even know a person could do that without both names. He handles the logins. I did not sign anything. Silence finds shape when you let it sit. Then she said, 3 payments have been late. The bank sent a notice today. He says he will fix it with a refinance or a plan. He keeps saying plan. I do not know which part is a plan and which part is hope. I wrote numbers on the green grid like I was taking measurements before a pour. 32.5. 3 missed payments. Notice. I am going to the library, I said. I will call you after I have paper. The Missoula Library sits with its back to a row of maples that throw a good shade in July. Inside the public terminals hum like old bees. I signed in, positioned my binder to the left, and pulled up county records. Property search, parcel number, owner of record. The screen gave me what quiet screens give when you ask with the right spelling. A deed recorded 5 years ago with both our names and then a subsequent instrument 8 months ago. A deed of trust securing a line of credit. Grantor Lila Mercer. Only his signature on the electronic line. Colorado allows it under certain conditions if the property is not primary or the title history reads a certain way. The tooltip on the screen had the statute reference. I took a screenshot of the record and printed a certified copy request form. The number 32,500 looked small on the page and then large depending on whether you count years or dollars. Recent payment history sat behind a portal I could not access from a public station, but the notice of default was public. A scanned document with a clerk stamp in the upper right corner. File date 2 weeks ago. 3 consecutive missed payments. Intent to accelerate if not cured. I printed it and placed it face down on the flatbed scanner to make a digital copy for Carla. The scanner woke with that slow warm-up and then sang one clean line as the light moved under the glass. Scanner. Beep. I emailed the scan to myself and to her with a subject line that would be useful later. Default notice with instrument number. I walked the corridor to the copy room and bought a roll of evidence sleeves from the office supply rack the library sells to people who still believe in 3 holes in binders. I thanked the clerk without looking up from the page because reading the same sentence 3 times until it sits in your bones is how some men pray. On the way back to the valley, I stopped at the small strip where a credit union shares a parking lot with a bakery. I bought a loaf for Connie because I had told her I would bring pie when the road melted and bread would do until pie learned the way. I turned the truck down my road and watched dust lift in sheets behind me. The porch waited with its chair and its one sound, and the wind in the pines leaned toward the deck as if to say, look down the drive. I checked the mailbox the way you check a new site for rebar. I put on nitrile gloves because fingerprints have a way of arguing with a clean story. In the box lay 3 envelopes bearing names that did not belong here. Harold Collins, Denise Collins. My address underneath in a font I recognized from the state office. The return corners told me the senders. Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services, Clearwater Credit Union, Social Security Administration. I photographed each envelope in place before I touched them. Front, back, postmark clear. Then I slid them into evidence sleeves and sealed the flap with a press that made a small sound like a truth sitting down. Envelope seal sound. On the porch, I set them in a row on the small table and took stills from the porch camera app time stamped to the minute. I called Carla and left a message short and clinical. 3 pieces of mail for Denise and Harold at my address. State benefits, credit union, Social Security. I have not given permission for anyone to use this address. Will email photographs and details. When she called back, she did not waste words. This is how people try to plant residency, she said. Benefits require presence. A credit union account plus a state envelope plus a federal agency is a triangle. Keep the envelope sealed. Photograph before you do anything. We will prepare an affidavit. Say the line you will have to say anyway and get used to the sound of it. I said it out loud so the cabin could hear. I never permitted anyone to use this address. Good, she said. Email me that sentence as well. Words in your mouth are good. Words on paper are better. She asked about Lila, and I told her what I had pulled from the county site and what the scanner had sung. She was quiet for a half-beat that sounded like a person doing 5 steps of law in her head. We will layer the pieces, she said. Unauthorized HELOC. 3 missed payments. Default notice. New mail suggesting an attempt to shift residency. This is a money engine. Motive is not a guess anymore. I ended the call and stood at the edge of the porch and looked where my sign on the drive still wore yesterday's dust. Wind moved from river to ridge and back again depending on how the pines breathed. The bears at the tree line had come and gone without a sentence or a plan. The mail on my table sat like bait I did not set. I photographed the envelopes again with the porch camera so the overlay could make it official for any person who needed it. I saved the images to the folder named by date and a word I would not forget. Mail. Inside, I made a new tab in the binder. Address, misuse. I slid the sleeves into it and wrote the short sentence again on an index card and clipped it to the front. I never permitted anyone to use this address. I printed the county record screenshots and the default notice and 3 small maps that show where the parcel lies in relation to the library where I scanned them and the clerk's office where the stamp lives. I wrote the time I parked and the time I paid for the print and the name of the clerk who asked if I needed a receipt. I saved the email thread with Carla under the subject default notice with instrument number. I put a square next to each item and checked the squares one by one until the page looked like a roof I could stand on. The phone buzzed with a text from Lila. It was just 2 words. I am scared. I called her back and let the line ring until she answered with the voice of a person trying not to break. You are not alone, I said. You have paper. We will use it. We will not shout. We will not lie. We will not let anyone tell your house what it is worth to you while they hide a loss that is not yours to carry. She asked what she should do right now. Breathe, I said. Then gather every piece of mail that mentions your mortgage. Photograph it. Do not confront. Not yet. We will meet at Carla's office. Bring your driver's license and your marriage certificate. Bring the last 3 bank statements if you can. If he asks why you are printing, say you are budgeting. She nodded into the phone. I could hear the page of something turn near her, a calendar, maybe a life. I told her I loved her and hung up and stood at the sink and let cold water run over my hands until the sound filled the room. The kettle began to hum behind me, and the scanner beep from the library replayed in my head. Uninvited, a small, pure tone that meant a document had become light and then turned back into ink. Outside, the wind changed sides on my raised finger. The cabin did not move. It waited the way good structures do, ready to take the next load without complaint. I did not buy a house. I bought a clock and wound it. Carla set the file between us and tapped once on the tab that read North Fork Holdings, LLC. Her office light made a square on the wood like a placemat for decisions. The printer warmed and then the hum settled into a steady note. She explained the mechanics without melody. Your son-in-law's mortgage is delinquent. The bank wants the paper off its books. We have an intermediary purchase the note at a discount, assign it to North Fork, and file notice of transfer. From that moment he pays us, or he does not. If he does not, the clock you bought moves to foreclosure on our schedule, not his imagination. She slid over the assignment of note. My name was nowhere visible. The trustee listed matched our filings. The parcel number on Lila's house sat plain in the header. I held the pages and felt nothing like triumph. It felt like checking a measurement twice and writing the number in pencil because ink would be arrogant. We executed the purchase with signatures that were not mine to the naked eye. I initialed where I was allowed to initial a separate document that lives behind a locked tab. When the courier left with the packet, the door thudded in that dependable way a good door thuds when the weather is dry. Carla looked at the clock on her wall as if timing a pour. Now we draft terms, she said. Not revenge. Boundaries. On her screen, the letter took shape. Certified notice of assignment. Current arrearage. Cure amount. Deadline. And then the offer. Full debt forgiveness. If Trent signs, a no-claims divorce waives all rights and expectations to any asset or estate of Evan Mercer and swears under penalty of perjury to cease interference with my property, my trust, and my person. She stopped typing. A sworn statement template will attach. He either signs all of it or the foreclosure calendar begins. 72 hours from receipt. If he calls to argue, he can speak to the document. If he threatens, he can speak to the sheriff. She printed the letter on heavy paper that makes a sound when you slide it across a desk. The sworn statement template came out behind it with blank spaces that would fit a name like a glove that cannot be borrowed. She added the certified mail slips and filled the addresses with that neat block she has when she wants postal workers to like her. Pen clicks marked each finish. The courier returned as if he had not completely left. Door thud again. The envelopes went into his pouch and became motion instead of paper. Back at the cabin, the forest held its breath and then exhaled. I placed a copy of the letter under a tab named Leverage and wrote the time the courier had taken the twins away. I made a small box and filled it when Carla's text arrived with confirmation of acceptance at the post office. The certified receipt numbers sat in the message like coordinates. I wrote them in the margin because numbers in margins do not lie. Lila came up that evening. The road dust did not bother her this time, and I counted that as a kind of progress. We sat on the porch with the folder on the table between us. She did not touch it. She looked at me instead and asked if this would ruin him. I said the only thing I knew to be clean. This gives you 2 doors and gives him the map. If he signs, he leaves without clause, and you keep your home. If he refuses, he loses the house to a process he cannot charm. I poured water and let the pause do quiet work. Trust the documents, I said. People lie. Paper does not. She picked up the sworn statement template and read the lines that would require his mouth to say, I renounce and I waive and I understand. She traced one blank with her finger like she was memorizing a road. Then she set it down and looked at the tree line where the light always gets tender at this hour. I want out, she said. The word out landed like a nail set flush with 2 taps. The first response to the certified letter did not come from Trent. It came from a number with a Federal Exchange. Carla called me before I could call her. The inquiry you expected arrived sooner than I expected. State Benefits Unit flagged the Montana mail you photographed and referred it to the regional office. A federal investigator called me this morning. They want the affidavit, your photos, and a sworn statement that you never permitted the use of your address. Harold and Denise will likely be asked to explain the residency claim. Expect a plea offer if they are smart. I took the binder out to the porch where the light was honest. I slid the evidence sleeves forward, 3 envelopes, front and back photographed, postmarks clear. I wrote the sentence again in a clean hand and signed it. I never permitted anyone to use this address. I dated the line and below it added the time of the mailbox check and the gloves note. Carla's assistant pinged my phone and I scanned the affidavit with the app that lays a false flat and hides the curl of a page. I heard the sound that app makes when a document leaves you and becomes light and then returns as proof. Scanner beep lived somewhere behind the birds. On the second day, a process server knocked on Trent's door, and he took the envelope because men who think they run rooms cannot help but open doors like they belong to them. Carla's paralegal texted the proof of service at the same time the postal system pushed a delivered status. 72 hours had started. Clocks run whether a man admits it or not. The first call arrived at the 23rd hour. He did not bother with hello. He said this was blackmail. He said my money had bought my daughter's hatred. He said I had broken a family. I kept my voice level enough to measure. Read the letter. Sign the statement. If you want to keep talking, talk to the document. He told me what he would do to the letter. I told him paper does not care about threats. He hung up, and the cabin took the sound and turned it into a smaller sound and then into none. At the 41st hour, his attorney reached Carla and tried the tone attorneys use when they hope to bargain with the weather. Carla did not bargain. She described the arrearage and the assignment and the waiver language and the consequences as if she were reading a parts list. The man on the other end ran out of phrases and promised a response by morning. She texted me as if she were noting a passing cloud. Lila did not sleep well and did not pretend otherwise. She sat at my small table and revised a list on a single sheet that held 3 columns. Things to take, things to sell, things to leave. She wrote in a handwriting that was not the one from school papers or cards. This hand had decisions in it. At the bottom, she left one line and wrote mercy, and then scratched it out and wrote repair. On the last morning of the clock, the courier thudded the door, and I met him like a man whose watch had struck an hour he had waited through without pacing. The envelope was heavier than any answer deserves to be. Inside lay every signature in the places we had left blank. The divorce papers with no claims, the waiver of rights to any present or future asset or estate of Evan Mercer. The sworn statement in his flat printing where the words "cease interference" had an accidental grace because he wrote them slowly, and they learned to look like they meant it. I carried the envelope to the table and set it on the folder before I opened my mouth. "Carla," I said into the phone, "we are done with the first part." She told me to scan and send and to breathe while the notary in her office prepared the release of lien and the debt forgiveness letter. The printer on her end hummed in my ear through the line in a way that felt like the sound a person's shoulders make when they finally drop. We signed the release that afternoon in her office. She pressed the seal, and the clack of the notary felt like a door that would not open the wrong way again. She slid one copy to me for the binder and placed the original where it had to go. She asked if I wanted to deliver the good paper myself. I said no. A courier would do. Men who build with forms do not need applause in the room. That night on the porch, I set the binder aside and let my hands be empty. The valley spread out with the low sound it saves for evenings when nothing is chasing anything. Lila leaned back in the chair beside me and watched the ridge take the last gold. She did not speak for a while. When she did, it was not about him. It was about a bookshelf she wanted to build in a small place near the school. We measured the air between us with quiet and found it held. The phone buzzed once with a federal number and a short message. The inquiry had become a case file. Harold and Denise had retained counsel. A plea conversation would begin. I forwarded the note to Carla and wrote a single line in my grid pad. Money engine identified. Fuel line cut. The pen clicked closed. Somewhere below the bend, a truck turned and rode away. The door took a thud from the evening breeze and then settled in the jam the way a good door does when a house is finally itself. Morning coffee tasted like air, not victory. Steam rose in a straight line and disappeared before it found the window. The cabin had that just washed quiet where everything sits exactly where your hand left it. I stood with the mug and let the first warmth rest against my face. Down in town, a notary was unlocking an office. A clerk somewhere was sliding a file onto the right stack. Up here, a J tried out 3 different notes and settled on one. The clock on the wall gave its soft tick and never once tried to be a drum. Trent signed under counsel in a room I did not enter. Carla called me when the last page was done. He read each line she said. He initialed every margin. No claims, no rights to any present or future asset of yours. A sworn promise to cease interference with you and with your trust. Her voice was even and quieter than pride. She told me his attorney kept adjusting his pen like the pen might change the ink already on the page. When the stamp came down, it sounded the way it always sounds. Final, but not cruel. Lila filed for divorce the next morning in a courthouse that does not need to look important to do important work. She had already made 3 lists on one sheet and had put her ring in an envelope she did not plan to open again. When she stepped out into the hallway, she felt for the first time in months that she could stand without bracing. She walked 2 blocks and bought a coffee and did not put sugar in it. Later, she called me from a bench near the elementary school and said that the world looked less like a problem and more like a map. Carla drew up the release of lien and the forgiveness letter and set them in front of me like tools on a clean bench. We signed. Her assistant sealed. The clerk recorded. The debt that had hung over my daughter's roof like weather simply left. Not a miracle. Paper. Files in order. Numbers arranged. The kind of work that does not generate applause because it does not want it. I drove back to the valley, and the road felt like itself again. The tires hummed a song that trucks hum when the load is honest. Harold and Denise stood in a federal courtroom and told the truth without decoration. A plea to misrepresentation, restitution to be calculated and paid, supervision, conditions, a ban on benefits they should never have tried to reach for. The prosecutor recommended leniency on jail. The judge agreed and gave them a path that looked like work. I sat in the back row 2 benches from aisle and watched the way people shrink when they finally stop pretending. I did not feel triumph. I felt the air moving in a place that had been starved of it. Carla found a way to make restitution useful beyond ledger lines. By court approval, a portion would route to the clinic in town for a new fund with a quiet name, the Caregiver Transport Fund. gas cards when a person needs to get to an early appointment and has no neighbor free that day, vouchers for the shuttle when the weather thinks it is February forever. The clinic would manage it and print simple forms that do not make pride suffer any more than it must. I signed a short statement supporting the structure and left the clinic office with the sound of the printer still in my ear. Lila found a small 2-room rental near the school with a view of the ridge where the last light gathers. The kitchen is narrow and tidy, and the bedroom can hold a dresser if you angle it. We carried a bookshelf up the stairs, and she said she would fill it with paperbacks kids could borrow. Once a month, she would run a program where students choose a book and a bookmark and a promise to bring the book back creased but loved. She called the librarian and asked for a card table. She asked me if I could make a sign. I told her I could make one that does not look like a sign but will never get lost. Sunday dinners returned without ceremony. She would drive up with a bag of greens or a loaf, and I would have the sauce already simmering. We would talk about classrooms and about how the river looks deeper after rain, even when you cannot measure it with your eyes. Sometimes we would talk about nothing and listen to forks find plates. Every meal ended with the same small ritual. She washed, I dried, she stacked. I stepped outside and made sure the porch was as boring as I like it to be. The night would come in clean. The chair would give its one soft sound. We would sit for 10 minutes and then call it a day. One evening before dinner, I mounted a shadow box near the kitchen light. The frame is plain wood with a glass that forgives fingerprints. Inside, I set a brass cabin key and the trout fly she tied when she was 9 with a tongue out in concentration and feathers stuck to her elbow. The key is the one I first set on this table when my hands still did not trust it belonged to me. The fly is the one that has been taped to the back of an old photo for 2 decades because we always meant to make a better home for it. I fixed both with short pins and closed the back and held the box up against the wall until it felt right. When the light warmed it, the brass lifted a little and the feather found a shadow that made it look like a small thing still moving. Lila studied it the way she reads a classroom when she wants to know if a lesson landed. She touched the glass with 2 fingers, as if to steady it and not to claim it. I kept my voice low because the room deserved it. I kept my promise, kiddo. She did not say thank you. She put her head on my shoulder and let the quiet have the floor. Later that week, the clinic sent a short note on letterhead. The fund had received its first allocation. Mrs. Rowe from 2 roads over used a voucher to get her brother to his appointment on a day the snow decided to try a late play. The note did not thank anyone. It simply reported a trip that happened and a person who arrived. Lila read it and said she could do a monthly read aloud at the clinic waiting room if they wanted someone to make the minutes easier. She emailed and they said yes. She chose a book about a kid who learns to repair bicycles and printed her name on the sign-up sheet even though anyone there already knew it. On a clear morning, I walked the property line and looked at the corners the way you look at a house when it is finally itself. The placard by the steps had collected summer dust and still did its job. The bare box sat quiet and dented and honest. The cameras rested with green lights that sleep more than they work. The binder on the table was thicker and calmer. The tab marked leverage had only 2 pages left because leverage is not a thing you keep pulling on once the door opens. I ran my finger along the edge of the clinic letter and closed the binder's rings with a sound that feels cleaner than a clap. At night, I leave the window over the sink open, just enough for the birds to find the hour that suits them. The air comes in with that pine you can taste. The lock gives one neat click when I turn it for the day and tells me that today is over and it ended the way a day should. On the fridge is a small card with 3 numbers and a line about where the deed lives now. On the shelf next to it, a jar holds bookmarks Lila cuts from old cereal boxes. Kids choose them for the drawings she puts on one side. Stars, a river, a fish that looks like a smile. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.